Most people believe that changing their life requires changing their circumstances. A better job, a different city, a new relationship. But here is the uncomfortable truth the ancient philosophers discovered thousands of years ago, and that modern psychology is only now beginning to confirm. Your circumstances are not the problem. Your mind is. And until you fix what is happening inside, every external change you make will eventually reproduce the same results. Different stage, same story. Section 1. The problem. Look honestly at your life right now, not the version you present to other people. Not the highlight reel you carry in your head, the actual unfiltered reality of your daily experience. Most people, if they are honest, will notice something unsettling. They are perpetually waiting for the right moment, waiting to feel ready, waiting for something outside them to shift so that something inside them can finally begin. And while they wait, weeks become months. Months become years. The life they imagined quietly recedes into the background, replaced by a numbing routine they never consciously chose. This is not laziness. It is not weakness. It is something far more specific and far more treatable. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of where life actually happens. Pause for a moment and consider this. Every person who has ever felt trapped, stuck, or quietly desperate has believed the same lie, that the solution exists somewhere outside the boundary of their own thinking. A better opportunity will arrive. Someone will finally recognize their value. The world will rearrange itself into a more favorable shape. And because they believe this, they invest almost no energy in the one place where transformation is actually possible. The interior world, the mind. Section 2. Why people react instead of think. Here is something worth understanding deeply. The human brain was not designed for wisdom. It was designed for survival. And those are not the same thing. For hundreds of thousands of years, the most successful human behavior was reactive. Something moves in the darkness, react. Someone in the tribe challenges you, react. An emotion surfaces, act on it immediately, because hesitation in the wild could mean death. This wiring kept the species alive, but it was never meant to help you build a meaningful, intentional life in the 21st century. Think about this. Every time someone sends you a message that irritates you and you respond instantly without thinking, that is ancient survival software running in a modern world. Every time you avoid a difficult conversation because the discomfort feels unbearable, that is the threat detection system misfiring. Every time you abandon a long-term goal because the short-term reward of distraction feels more powerful, that is the brain doing exactly what it was built to do, which is to say, nothing in that behavior is personal, but all of it is your responsibility. The Stoics understood this distinction more clearly than almost any civilization before or since. They were not idealists who believed you could simply choose to feel nothing. They were pragmatists who recognized that while you cannot always control your first reaction, you have absolute authority over what comes next. The thought after the thought, the choice after the impulse. That gap, that small but infinite space between stimulus and response, is where your entire life is decided. Section 3. Stoic wisdom. Marcus Aurelius was one of the most powerful men who ever lived. He commanded the largest empire on earth. He possessed more wealth and authority than most humans can conceptualize. And yet, if you read his private journals, a collection we now know as Meditations, you will not find a single line about acquiring more power more territory, or more recognition. What you will find is a man in relentless, disciplined conversation with his own mind. He wrote almost obsessively about perception, about the stories he told himself when things went wrong, about the difference between what actually happened and what he chose to make it mean. He returns to one idea again and again across hundreds of entries written late at night for no audience but himself. The idea is this: you have almost no control over what happens to you, but you have total control over the quality of your response. You have power over your mind, he wrote, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Consider the weight of that statement. Not comfort, not peace, strength. The Stoics were not teaching passivity. They were teaching something far more demanding, the discipline of governing the one domain that is entirely yours. Epictetus, who began his life as a literal slave, built an entire philosophy on this single foundation. He had no freedom of movement, no property, no legal rights. A master who once broke his leg deliberately to test his reaction. And from that position, from the absolute bottom of the Roman social order, he taught what many emperors never learned: that true freedom is not a condition of the body, it is a condition of the mind. The things we own, the positions we hold, the approval we receive, these can be taken. What cannot be taken is the quality of your inner life, unless you surrender it yourself. Section 4. The psychological trap. Now here is where the psychology becomes particularly important. There is a mechanism in human thinking that psychologists call the external locus of control. It refers to the belief, often completely unconscious, that the causes of your life exist outside of you. That you are primarily a product of your environment, your upbringing, your luck, and the decisions other people make. People with a strong external locus of control feel chronically reactive, frustrated, and powerless because they have outsourced the authorship of their lives to forces they cannot govern. The research on this is unambiguous. People who believe they have meaningful agency over their outcomes show higher levels of resilience, satisfaction, achievement, and psychological well-being, regardless of their circumstances. But here is the trap that almost no one talks about. Developing an internal locus of control is not simply a matter of motivation. You cannot simply decide to believe you have power and suddenly find yourself living with intention, because the same mind that created the problem is being asked to solve it. And that mind is full of patterns, assumptions, and unconscious narratives that have been running, unexamined, for years. Carl Jung called this the shadow, not evil, not weakness in the simple sense, but the accumulated weight of everything we have refused to look at honestly, the fears we disguise as preferences, the resentments we frame as principles, the self-defeating patterns we repeat while telling ourselves a story about why this time is different. Jung believed, and the evidence strongly supports this, that what you refuse to examine in yourself will quietly govern your decisions. You will think you're making free choices. But the unexamined mind is not free. It is a prisoner of its own blind spots. Section 5. The mindset shift. So what is the alternative? It is not positive thinking. That is too shallow and collapses under real pressure. It is not toxic stoicism, the performed indifference where you pretend nothing affects you and call it strength. That is just emotional suppression wearing a philosophical costume. The actual shift is both simpler and more demanding than either of those. It begins with a single commitment, the commitment to observe your mind before you obey it. This is what meditation teachers, Stoic philosophers, and cognitive therapists have all arrived at independently, through completely different traditions and methodologies. Before you act from an emotion, pause. Before you believe a thought, examine it. Before you accept a story about yourself or your situation, ask whether that story is actually true or whether it is simply familiar. Imagine this. Someone criticizes your work. In that moment, a reaction arises. Maybe defensiveness, maybe shame, maybe the quiet rage of someone who has tied their self-worth to external validation. The untrained mind obeys that reaction immediately. It fires back or it withdraws. It either attacks or collapses. But the person who has done this inner work experiences the same reaction and then does something radical. They wait. They watch the reaction without immediately becoming it. And in that pause, they find a question instead of an impulse. Is this criticism accurate? What is actually being said beneath the emotional charge? What would the wiser version of me do here? That pause is not weakness. It is the most sophisticated cognitive skill a human being can develop. Section 6. Real-life examples. Let us make this concrete, because philosophy without application is just beautiful noise. Think about someone in a professional environment. Perhaps you have been this person who receives critical feedback from a colleague or superior. The first instinct is to defend the work, to explain the context, to make the critic understand all the reasons their criticism misses the point. And even if the defense is articulate, even if it sounds reasonable, the underlying impulse is not about truth. It is about protecting a fragile sense of self. Now, imagine approaching that same moment differently. Not performing humility, not suppressing the discomfort, but genuinely asking, even for a few seconds before responding, whether there is something true in what is being said. That one question, asked in good faith, changes the entire dynamic. It transforms a defensive exchange into a productive one. And more importantly, it builds something inside you that no external achievement ever could. The knowledge that you can remain clear under pressure. Or consider social comparison. One of the most corrosive forces in modern life, and something Seneca wrote about with remarkable precision 2,000 years before social media made it ubiquitous. Seneca observed that human beings have an almost compulsive tendency to measure their lives against others, and he noted something subtle and devastating. We rarely compare ourselves to people whose lives give us genuine inspiration. We compare ourselves to people who make us feel behind, inadequate, like we have somehow misread the rules of a game everyone else seems to be winning. It is not that I am suffering, he wrote, and I am paraphrasing here. It is that I am measuring. The suffering is not in the life. It is in the comparison. Remove the comparison and the suffering largely dissolves. Not because life becomes easier, but because you are no longer evaluating your existence through a lens designed to make you feel deficient. This is not abstract. Think about the last time you opened a platform and felt, within minutes, a subtle but unmistakable drop in your sense of your own life. That drop is not information. It is a psychological mechanism. And once you see it clearly, you can choose not to be governed by it. Section 7. Deeper philosophy. Socrates offered what may be the most important philosophical insight in Western history. Not a theory of ethics, not a cosmological model, a single, devastating observation that the unexamined life is not worth living. And people have quoted that line so many times it has lost some of its original violence. Because Socrates was not making a gentle suggestion. He was making a claim about the nature of existence itself. That a life lived without honest self-inquiry is, in the most meaningful sense, a life that is not fully being lived. It is a performance, a reaction, a biological process mistaken for a human one. Aristotle built on this with his concept of eudaimonia, often translated as happiness, but more accurately understood as flourishing, the actualization of your highest potential. And Aristotle was explicit that this flourishing was not a feeling, it was an activity, the ongoing disciplined work of aligning your actions with your deepest values and your clearest thinking. Joy, in the Aristotelian sense, is not what happens to you when circumstances go well. It is what you build through the consistent exercise of your best qualities. This reframes everything, because if flourishing is an activity and not a condition, then it is available to you right now, not when the promotion arrives, not when the relationship stabilizes, not when the anxiety finally quiets. Now, in this moment, through the quality of your attention and the integrity of your choices. That is one of the most quietly radical ideas in the history of human thought. And most people will live and die without ever taking it seriously. Section 8. Reflective questions. So let me ask you something directly, and not rhetorically, as a genuine invitation to honest reflection. When was the last time you sat quietly, without a screen, without music, without anything to consume, and simply observed what your mind actually does when left to itself? Most people find this deeply uncomfortable because what they discover is not peace. They discover a mind that is almost constantly narrating, judging, replaying, projecting, and catastrophizing. A mind that behaves less like a wise advisor and more like a very anxious commentator who has never been told to stop. And here is the question beneath that question. If that voice, that constant internal narrator, is not always speaking truth, and if it is not always serving your highest interests, then why are you obeying it without examination? Ask yourself honestly, how many decisions have you made in the last year that were driven by fear rather than genuine reasoning? How many conversations did you avoid because the discomfort felt easier to postpone? How many times did you know the right action and choose the comfortable one instead, and then construct an explanation afterward to make the choice feel justified? This is not a condemnation. It is a map. Because the moment you can see these patterns clearly, you are no longer trapped inside them. You are observing them. And what you can observe, you can begin to change. Section 9. The long-term advantage. Here is what very few people ever discover because it requires patience that our current culture actively discourages. The person who genuinely commits over years and not just weeks, to developing this quality of inner clarity builds something that cannot be replicated by any external achievement. They build psychological sovereignty, the capacity to remain grounded and intentional regardless of what the environment provides or demands. And the long-term effects of this are extraordinary, not dramatic, not loud, but extraordinary, in the way that compound interest is extraordinary, invisible for a long time, then suddenly transforming everything. The person with genuine inner clarity makes better decisions under pressure. They are less reactive in conflict, which means their relationships function at a higher level. They are less dependent on external validation, which means their sense of self does not rise and fall with every piece of praise or criticism. They can tolerate discomfort without being destroyed by it, which means they can pursue genuinely difficult goals long after the initial motivation has faded. And they can sit with uncertainty, which is the permanent condition of human life, without needing to collapse it prematurely into false certainty. If this kind of thinking resonates with you, if this conversation is one you want to continue, consider subscribing. This channel exists for people who want to go deeper, not louder, deeper. Marcus Aurelius spent years, arguably the rest of his life, working on this quality of mind. He was emperor. He had every incentive to believe he had arrived. And yet the journal entries keep coming. The questions keep returning. The commitment to self-examination never ceases. And this is perhaps his greatest teaching, not a single insight, but the demonstration that this work has no final destination. It is a practice, a lifelong orientation, and the people who understand this are never bored by it, because the territory being explored is genuinely infinite. Section 10. Closing. There is a moment, it arrives differently for everyone, when a person stops trying to manage their life from the outside and begins the far more demanding, far more rewarding work of governing it from within. That moment does not announce itself. It rarely arrives with fanfare or dramatic revelation. More often, it comes quietly. A recognition, a slight shift in perspective, the sense that you have been looking in the wrong direction for a very long time, and that the thing you were searching for was always here, waiting beneath the noise of your own unexamined assumptions. You do not need a different life to begin this work. You need a different quality of attention applied to the life you already have. The Stoics called this praxis, the active application of philosophy to daily existence. Not theory discussed in comfortable rooms, but wisdom tested against the full difficulty of real life, against loss and disappointment and the slow erosion of small compromises, against the gap between who you intend to be and who you actually are at 3 a.m. when no one is watching. That gap is not a failure. It is an invitation. Fix your mind first, not because external circumstances do not matter, but because the mind you bring to your circumstances determines everything. What you notice, what you choose, what you build, and ultimately, who you become. The work begins not tomorrow, not when conditions improve. It begins the moment you decide that your inner life deserves the same serious attention you have been giving to everything else. That moment can be now.